There were small moments I began noticing more often. Our hands brushing while reaching for the same tool. The way his eyes lingered on me for a second longer than expected. Not openly, but not entirely hidden either. Each time it happened, something inside my chest tightened. And each time, I looked away. One night, while lying awake in bed, a thought came to me that filled me with a deep and uncomfortable guilt. I had started listening for the sound of Daniel's truck more than I waited for my husband's phone calls. The realization didn't arrive like a sudden shock. It arrived slowly, heavy, quiet, like a truth that had been forming for days before I finally allowed myself to see it. I tried to reassure myself. I told myself emotional closeness wasn't betrayal. I wasn't touching him. I wasn't crossing any obvious line. But the truth about lines is this. They rarely announce themselves when you cross them. Sometimes they fade so slowly that one day you look around and realize you're standing somewhere you never intended to be. And by then, turning back feels much harder than you expected. About the seasons. About how strange the house felt when it was empty. Daniel listened in a way that surprised me. Not the way most people listen, waiting for their turn to speak, but the way someone listens when they genuinely want to understand. And that unsettled me, because being understood can sometimes feel more dangerous than being ignored. Eventually, I stepped back outside into the cold night air. The stars had begun to appear above the fields. The wind moved softly across the land. But something inside me had changed. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just a conversation. Just a brief moment of company during a lonely evening. But later that night, lying alone in our bed, my thoughts kept returning to the barn. To Daniel. To the way the silence had felt different when he was there. And for the first time since my husband had left, the house didn't feel quite as empty. After that evening, Daniel began stopping by more often. Always with a reason. A fence post that needed reinforcing. A gate hinge that refused to close properly. A section of the barn roof that might not survive the next storm. Practical things. Necessary things. At least that's what I told myself. I never invited him to stay. And he never asked. But somehow, every visit lasted longer than the last. We worked side by side most days. Passing tools. Fixing small problems. Sharing quiet conversations that blended naturally into the rhythm of farm life. Sometimes we spoke. Sometimes we didn't. But the silence between us never felt uncomfortable. It felt understood. But one evening, as the house grew heavier with silence, I found myself walking toward it. I didn't plan to. I didn't even think about it. My feet simply carried me down the dirt path that led from the house to the barn. The cold air bit gently at my face as I approached. And then I noticed something unusual. A soft glow was leaking through the wooden cracks in the barn walls. Light. Warm and unmistakable. I stopped immediately. My heart began pounding faster. My husband wasn't supposed to return for several more days. For a moment, fear wrapped tightly around my chest. Had someone broken in? Was someone living in the barn? I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the thin lines of light cutting through the wood. Inside, someone was moving. Not rushing. Not hiding. Just moving calmly, as if they belonged there. I pushed the door open slowly. The hinges creaked loudly in the quiet evening air. And then the figure inside turned toward me. Recognition came instantly. It was Daniel, my husband's old friend. He had helped around the farm during the busiest seasons for years. The kind of man who never spoke more than necessary. But when something needed to be done, he was always there. Reliable. Quiet. Steady. He looked surprised for only a second before relaxing again. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said calmly. His voice was deep and familiar in a way that immediately eased the tension in my chest. "Your husband asked me to stop by and check the equipment while he's gone." I nodded quickly. Too quickly. Relief washed through me, though something else came with it. Something warmer. Something more complicated. We talked for a while after that. Longer than either of us probably intended. At first, it was simple things. The condition of the tractor. The weather. The repairs that might be needed before spring arrived. But gradually the conversation drifted into quieter territory. We spoke about the farm. each second echoing through the empty rooms like a reminder that time was moving forward whether I wanted it to or not. At night, the wind brushed against the barn doors, making them groan softly against their hinges. The animals shifted in their stalls, their quiet movements reminding me that life continued around me. But something had changed. The house no longer felt like a shared space. It felt like a place waiting for someone who wasn't there. At first I kept myself busy. That's what people do when loneliness begins creeping in. They pretend productivity can fill the empty spaces inside them. I cleaned things that were already spotless. I reorganized drawers that had been perfectly fine for years. I fixed loose hinges and tightened screws that didn't actually need tightening. Anything to keep moving. Anything to avoid sitting still long enough for the quiet to settle in completely. But loneliness doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't knock on your door and introduce itself. Instead, it slips quietly through the smallest cracks in your life. And before you realize it, it's already there. The barn had always belonged more to my husband than to me. Not because I wasn't welcome there, but because everything inside it carried his presence. The tools hanging on the walls. The workbench covered in scratches from years of repairs. The faint smell of oil and sawdust mixed with dry hay. Every beam and nail seemed to hold a memory of him. Because of that, I rarely went inside when he wasn't around. It felt strange, almost like stepping into someone else's private world. Work comes and goes in seasons, and sometimes the best opportunities appear far from home. That winter morning began like any other. But by evening, everything felt different. My husband stood in the doorway, pulling his jacket closed as cold air slipped into the house behind him. The sky outside was pale and heavy with clouds, the kind that made the whole world feel quieter than usual. He grabbed his bag from the chair near the door, slinging it over his shoulder with the casual confidence of someone who had done this many times before. 2 weeks, he said, his voice steady. Just a short job in the city. Good pay. Then I'll be back before you know it. He said it like it was simple, like it was nothing more than another routine trip. And maybe that's why I nodded. Not because I was completely certain, but because believing him felt easier than asking questions. I watched from the porch as he carried the final bag to his truck. The engine roared to life, breaking the stillness of the morning. For a moment, he looked back toward the house. Then he drove away. The gravel road stretched across our land like a long scar cutting through fields that seemed endless. The truck moved slowly at first, tires crunching against the frozen stones beneath them. Dust lifted into the cold air behind him. And then the sound began to fade. First the engine, then the gravel. Until finally, there was nothing. At the time, I didn't understand how important that moment would become. Because that was the moment silence truly arrived. The farm had always been large. But when you're alone, large spaces feel different. They grow. Rooms that once felt comfortable suddenly feel hollow. The kitchen clock became the loudest thing in the entire house. Tick, tick, tick. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. Your support helps us share more powerful and unforgettable stories with people all around the world. Some stories are loud, dramatic, explosive, but others are different. They unfold quietly, almost invisibly, inside moments most people would overlook. Today's story is one of those. It's not simply about temptation or betrayal. It's about silence, about loneliness, about the way a person can slowly change when the life they knew becomes unfamiliar. And sometimes, it only takes one unexpected moment to begin that change. So take a deep breath, settle in, and listen closely. Because what you're about to hear is not just a story about what happened in a barn on a cold winter evening. It's a story about the things we feel when no one else is watching. Before everything changed, life on the farm followed a rhythm that felt almost timeless. Mornings arrived with the sound of roosters and the soft hum of wind moving through fields of dry grass. Even the air carried a certain familiarity, the scent of soil, hay, and wood smoke drifting from the chimney. It was the kind of life that didn't move quickly. And for years, I believed that was exactly how life should be. My husband and I had built everything here with our own hands. The land had been his family's for generations, passed down like a quiet promise from one set of hands to the next. The house itself was modest, worn wooden floors, aging walls, and windows that rattled whenever the wind grew strong. But to me, it had always felt like home. Still, life on a farm has its own demands.